For even the most avid cookbook readers, food styling can be a mysterious process. Today's guest shares a peek behind the smoke and mirrors. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Molly Stevens, and joining me today is Kate Leahy. Hey, Kate.
Hey, Molly.
What's your experience with food styling?
I do have experience. It was short-lived, but it was fun. I was a food style assistant for a food stylist named George DeLise. Mm-hmm. He's done loads of stuff with Williams-Sonoma. He's also styled some of David Leibowitz's books. His main assistant was going on maternity leave, and he needed somebody just for like 6 months. So that's what I did. I learned that it's pretty much like if you need to get a Meyer lemon blossom, even when Meyer lemon trees are not blooming, you have to go to nurseries and you have to look around and find one and then bring it back to set and hope they still need the Meyer lemon blossom.
And hope it doesn't wilt on the way there.
I hope it doesn't wilt on the way back to the studio. But one thing I did learn, though, is that coming from restaurants, I was used to having to finish everything. Like, I got to get my chives sliced and my, vinaigrettes ready and have my station set. And food styling, the flow of things is so much different. Mm-hmm. And to sort of be more calm and more just, calm, quiet. It's not about the hustle. It's about being helpful. It's just a different energy.
Right.
I enjoy it. Sometimes I'm thinking, I'm tired of staring at screens writing. I'm like, maybe I should just assist for a little bit. So someone else has to make all the decisions and I'm just told what to do.
Right. Assisting is different than being the stylist.
Right. Being the stylist, I think, would stress me out. I'm not cut out for being a stylist. How about you?
I did a little of it when I was doing a lot of work with Fine Cooking Magazine, and we had a real hands-on, it was very early days. But I did learn some tricks of the trade, how to keep things shiny, how to keep things fresh. But it's also always about having backup, in my experience. And it's funny, a lot of people, when they find you're a cookbook author, they assume you do the styling for your own books. And I have, helped on my books, but boy, a good food stylist is invaluable for putting, even though they're my recipes, I know how to make them, but how to make them pop on camera or do whatever it is they need to do.
Right.
But always that having, extras and, like you said, being calm, being ready, because you never know.
Right.
I find it fascinating too. And we haven't talked to a lot of food stylists on this show. And today we are going to talk to a very successful food stylist, Victoria Granof. And she has been at this for decades. And she has seen the good, the bad, the ugly side of food styling. She's worked in kitchens before becoming a stylist, which led her to work on shoots for numerous publications, brands, magazines. And she's also ghostwritten cookbooks with like Snoop Dogg, Tony Bourdain, and as she says, quote, food influencers who can't cook and shall remain anonymous.
Right. The thing that's really fun about Victoria's story is she started a Substack earlier this year called Delicious Tangents, and she spills the beans behind the scenes of what it's like, what she's seen in her career. So I highly encourage people to subscribe if you're at all curious. What we're going to be talking to her about today is this new beautiful book she came out with last fall called Sicily, My Sweet Love Notes to an Island with Recipes for Cakes, Cookies, Puddings, and Preserves.
I think we're going to have a lot to talk about, so let's get her on. Victoria, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We have a lot of our listeners either are food stylists or think about food styling. So we do want to talk a little bit about your career as a food stylist. And your Substack, Kate and I have both been really enjoying reading it. You write about getting started in food styling. Mm-hmm. And you write, my first assignment was to spray paint nasturtiums various shades of orange. And after that, a Jenny Craig commercial featuring chocolate pudding that tasted, quote, so chocolatey, I never felt deprived.
It's in my head.
Yeah. And you describe yourself as an OG food creative. Can you take us back a little bit?
OG food creative. That's funny. OG food stylist was Adam Rappaport before he fell from grace. He gave me that name. And food creative, I gave that to myself. I have been struggling for several years now because although I started as a food stylist, I've kind of come into the process earlier than I love the whole process. I love the creative direction. I love the concepting. I love the set. I love all that set design. And so I struggled with what to call myself that encompasses all of that. And there's been a lot of talk about portfolio careers lately. Have you guys been hearing that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it just sounds very unsexy. But I understand the struggle because it was my own. So back to how I got started. Well, my mother was a judge, a lawyer and a judge. So she had spent my childhood fighting for women's rights and liberation, as they called it. We ate the worst stuff at home because she was a really apathetic cook.
And busy.
Yeah, busy. When I said that I thought I wanted to get into food, she cringed. Like, no, I have worked so hard to get out of the kitchen. I do not want to see you in. This was like the mid 80s, I guess, when there were hardly any women in the kitchen, hardly any. It was a hard slog. It wasn't easy. My grandmother died, left me a little bit of money. I went to Europe. I went to the Cordon Bleu. I did a couple of stages at a place in Switzerland that I thought was run by my family because we had the same last name, and it was before the internet. I'm going to be writing about this. And after living with them for 2 years and working in their restaurant and everything, I came back to the United States, and I was really excited to see my family. And my uncle, who is the genealogist, he looked at it, he pulled out the family tree from 1642, and he goes, "We're not related to those people." So, okay. I started out cooking, and then I decided to go to real college. I went to FIT and I studied, I don't know what visual arts of some sort. I never intended to do anything with it. It was just my parents said, "You have to get a degree.
Right.
We don't care what it is. You just have to get a degree." So that's what I did. And then I worked for an architect for a while, but then cooking was really gnawing at me. First, I went to FIT, did that. I wanted to cook, and I would cook at night. I would bake pastries at night and sell them to little restaurants and coffee shops. Then I went and I started working at Trump's and Spago in West Hollywood while Nancy Silverton was just leaving Spago. And then I worked at Angeli, Evan Kleiman's restaurant. Right. I was her chef. One of the investors in the restaurant was a food photographer. They kind of fixed me up with him. I went on a date with him. We got along fine. The next day, I went to his studio, and there was some woman cooking. He was shooting a cookbook. She was cooking in there, and I said, "Who is that?" And he goes, "That's food stylist." I went, "Oh, what does she do?" And, she said her makeup is in place. She doesn't smell like salmon. She's like, "This looks good." And so I said, "How do you get to be one?" He goes, "Well, you have to assist."
Right.
I said, "Who's the best?" And he goes, "Well, I didn't give you his name because he's kind of nursing a bad Coke habit right now, but he's a genius." I would give me his name, and I'm not naming names, but you will know who it is if you were there in those days. And so I called the guy up and I go, "Look, I know nothing, but I know that you're a genius. I want to learn from you. I also know you're nursing a Coke habit. So, listen, just so you know, I'll bail you out of jail. You have to pay for it. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I won't do anything illegal, but, as long as I can assist you.
I got your back."
Yeah.
Right.
And that's how I got in. And I can remember going to Gardena courthouse one morning. He called me up and he goes, "You need to pick me up. I've been in the, jail all night long." And he was sitting in the middle of a meadow in front of the courthouse making a daisy chain. And I'm like, oh my God, I better learn fast because this guy is not long for this world. But he would continue to be really successful, and I learned a lot from him. And it was just by a fluke that I was on set, and he worked a lot with Bon Appetit. Everybody was there. We were all ready, except he called and he said, "I need you to bail me out of jail." And the art director or the editor, whoever was on set, said, "Just leave him there. You can do this."
This is wild. I'm really thinking a lot of times people think the restaurants are where all the drama is. And you're saying, no.
Oh, no. Especially in LA, because one of the first things I did, I got a side job at Smashbox Studios, the very first Smashbox Studios, where it was in Culver City, way in the back where nobody was. away from the studios. And that's where, all the celebrities, big celebrities, would go and do their photo shoots. I got a part-time job being a pastry chef in their kitchen because they would cater all the shoots. And the crazy stuff that would go on with the celebrities, it was madness. And I ended up private chefing for Sharon Stone for a while and making her wedding cake. And that was a whole other thing. I have to remember to write.
Yeah.
Right. This is why everyone listening should go ahead and subscribe to your Substack, because these stories are coming out.
Yeah.
In there.
Stay tuned.
Oh my God. It's called Delicious Tangents because this is how I communicate. I am now going to go off on a small tangent. The way I stopped working with her was she was going to get married. It was top secret. And I had to sign a $50,000 NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And then I slipped. I really legitimately slipped. A guy who was at Smashbox, he knew that I had been private chefing for her. His wife was a reporter on Entertainment E, whatever that show is. And he tricked me. He just goes, are you going to be catering the whole wedding Saturday or just the cake? And I went, just the cake.
Oh.
And that was
You got trapped.
I got totally trapped. Yeah. But I quickly called the Star magazine. I go, how much would you pay me for a top secret? Like, oh God, tens of thousands. So sure enough, when their lawyer called and said, you're in breach, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, listen, by my calculations, I can sell this story and a lot of other stuff to the Star for a lot more than $50,000. So I think that you can just sue me for the $50,000 because I'm going to be making a lot more when I tell everything. So they're like, okay, never mind. We'll just drop it and settle this. And so that's how I didn't sell anything because that's, I sold nothing. That was it.
Wow.
And then she called me and she said, I don't want the energy of betrayal in my wedding cake. But I got to make the groom's cakes for her husband because I guess she didn't mind the energy of betrayal being in his cakes. So,
energy of betrayal.
The energy of betrayal, yes.
Wow. Let me just back up. Before you started food styling, when you were working in restaurants, did you think, this is what I want to do. One day I want to have my own restaurant?
Yes, and I did. I had a little tea room, a little psychic tea room in Venice Beach called the Queen of Cups.
Oh, what made it psychic?
It was called the Queen of Cups after my own personal tarot card. And then I just had this crew of tea leaf readers and psychics and astrologers and constantly there. And so you could come in and have a reading or book a reading and then have coffee.
Well, this is also Venice Beach in the 90s.
Oh, definitely. And then I had my share of crazy celebrities there. One day, Joni Mitchell took the entire upstairs and chain smoked, just kind of held court for hours, and people would just come in and talk to her, and that was fun. I'd love to do that again, actually, but
yeah, I would go. At some point you thought, I would rather be a food stylist than running, a psychic tea shop or working for somebody else.
First I assisted, and then I went out and did some work, and then I got tapped to chef by Atlas Bar and Grill, Mario Tamayo in the 80s, who had owned Cha Cha Cha, and he was, quite the thing. And so I did that whole Angeli. I worked for Mary Sue and Susan at City Restaurant, the two hot tamales. Yeah, God, that's funny. I did jump back and forth, didn't I? Then I had my own place. And then when that closed, because my partner stuck all the tax money up his nose, that's when I went back into food styling for real. And I'd gotten a part-time job at Smashbox. That was that trajectory. Smashbox, blah, 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 blah. And from there, all the photographers would work. Lanny Leibowitz worked there. That was a whole other story. Tune into Substack for that one. So I ended up doing things for her too.
There's so much here. But the food styling, you clearly did both a lot of magazine work, cookbook work, and commercial work.
I still do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still do. Not as much magazine work.
Right.
Because mostly branding is, digital branding. I work for a lot of small brands because I think it's fun to, like, emerging brands, startups. Because I love, that to me is what's taken the place of editorial. Because if somebody approaches me and says, I'm doing this thing for some Indian spices, they don't have a lot of money, but I get to be super creative and come up with concepts and visuals and, recipes and stories and all of that for them and style things and, do an image library. And to me, it's like editorial was a quarter the money, but that's where I get to really exercise creativity in food styling.
Right. Because certainly not every food stylist gets involved at that level of
No,
art
no, no, no.
direction and concept. Yeah.
No,
Right.
that's no. Mm-mm. You can if you are really good. I
Right.
mean, you can if if you approach emerging brands and small startups and you say, listen, I'll be, but I volunteered to work for free when I first started out. People paid me from the beginning, but I was like, listen, I have no experience. I don't know what I'm doing, but I kind of know what I'm doing. So I'll work for free. And then when you feel like I know what I know and, you can trust me, you can start paying me.
Yeah. One of the things I think people don't realize is that styling food, you have to be a really incredible cook, but there's also, you have to know a lot more than just specifically like how to roast a chicken. For you, like when you were going from working in commercial kitchens to a set, what were some of the lessons that you just didn't even think you would have to learn about just how different food is on set versus like food on a plate in a restaurant?
Well, especially because I started with film. I feel like a dinosaur. I'm not a dinosaur, actually.
No.
But we started on film. These little digi babies, they just don't know how lucky they are. Because we would have to make something look good and stay that way, freeze that thing until they got the film. If it was a long exposure, you'd be sitting there and like click, 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 and the stuff is dying,
Yep.
So I had to learn the properties of food in a different way. Not how to bring out their aromas and their flavors, but how to bring out how they looked and how they interacted with one another.
Right.
So that's very different. When you're cooking in a restaurant, you have the benefit of all these senses because somebody's there. They can smell it, they can taste it, they can hear it if it's crackling, they can see it, they can touch it. But in food styling, food media, food photography, food imagery, you are only looking at it.
Right.
So you've got to find a different way to get all those other senses in play.
You've got to make it look crackly.
Yeah.
And so how do you stay up to date? I mean, I read that you had one of your posts, you talked about how single sliced cheese, you used to be able to just, I forget what you spread on it and it would look melty.
Pine salt,
right? And it would melt, a solvent. And now that doesn't work anymore because they've changed the formulas. How do you stay up to date and figure out what's going to work as food technology changes too?
Well, first of all, every time I work with something, the first time is not on set.
Right.
I also say, if you know who your client is, Google that client. Find out what they've done. Find out who they are. Find out a little bit about them so you know a little bit about what their point of view is also. Mm-hmm. So you're not just giving them something that will never work. But I always play with something before. I'm actually directing a couple of spots that are partnerships between Bon Appetit and a coffee machine company. This coffee machine is the worst thing ever. They sent it to me because they were so proud of it and they want me to work with it before. And it's just but in this case, I go, okay, well, wait a second. This is not going to give this rich drip because the coffee is watery. So now what am I going to have to do to mitigate that on set? How am I going to direct the food stylist who's not going to be me? So that's another thing now. I'm directing food stylists. Mm-hmm. How are we going to solve for that? And I would never know if that stuff were dripping while the camera was rolling, right. We'd be in big, big trouble.
Right.
A lot goes into the prep.
A lot goes into the prep and a lot you don't get paid for. So you have to be prepared. If you're going to be an excellent stylist, sometimes you're not going to get paid for what it's going to take to be excellent. That's on your dime.
Well, we could talk to you all day about styling. You are also a great writer. Have you always wanted to write? Have you always written?
Do you know, I've always observed as a writer. First of all, I'm blessed with a sense of humor, so thank God. And even more, a sense of irony. So
when you say you kind of observe the world as a writer, did you ever keep journals? Did you write things down?
If I were to show you what I write down, no.
The answer is no.
No, yeah. Delicious tangents. My brain does not work that way. The way my brain works, and I figured this out, you know what? I think that's a very big lesson for everybody to figure out how their brain works. And I mean that seriously. I know I have learned that I am truly creative after 2:00. Before 2:00, it's a struggle. I don't know why, but that's the deal. And I used to beat myself up. And now I just go, listen, I'm going to do something else before 2, and then I'm going to go to it. And it makes it so much easier. But I think I have input all the time. It's an open brain. right? So I get input from all different areas. And then somehow, I don't know what happens in there. It cooks, it simmers around, and it comes out just kind of an amalgam of all the things that I've let in. And I think if you are too focused on one thing, I mean, focus is great if you need to focus, but if you're just walking around and you're too focused on, the outcome or on something, you're not getting all of the other input. You're not noticing light. You're not noticing some crazy thing that happened. You're not noticing, like, why is that there? And it's all that stuff that all of a sudden comes back and goes, wait a minute. I don't know. That's how it works for me.
No, I love that. It makes me think of in the book, the lemon bergamot olive oil cake. You actually share your process for coming up with that recipe, and we'll get into but it is that you're like, it was something here. Olive oil cakes didn't really like them. You've seen things cooked on bay leaves here, and you just outline this whole process and how you came up with it. It's good advice.
Thank you. No, that is kind of how it works. Just be open to influences. I guess I'm just open to, and mostly things that don't seem to make sense.
What's an example? Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know. Things that seem kind of discordant that you wouldn't think would go. And then later on you go, oh, wait a minute. I remember seeing that thing. I wonder if it would go with this. If you go about your day after this and you notice something and it doesn't seem to relate to anything else, and then you notice something else, if you're open to it, your brain will put those things together and go like, oh, wait a second. Maybe that, I don't know. Maybe it won't put it together, but mine does.
Yeah. No, but it reminds me, we had a guest a while back, Rachel Bell out of the Pacific Northwest, and her advice was to get out of the house. And just because you're more apt to see things that don't fit if you're surprising things if you're not in your, very familiar environment.
Well, also in New York City.
Yeah, there's a lot of discordant things around when you step out your stoop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I do not talk on the phone or text while I'm on the street. I just walk and look.
No podcasts, no talking on the phone.
Oh, no. When people go, and on the subway, when people go, I was listening to a podcast in the subway. I'm like, I listen to podcasts in the morning. I listen when I can focus on them. I listen when at night. I don't listen to them when there's something funky to see.
Right.
Interesting. Because then you're not paying attention to either one.
Yeah.
I understand you've also worked as a ghostwriter for cookbooks. Is that a different kind of creative process to write in somebody else's voice?
That's something I'm doing more and more. Yeah.
Do you like it?
I love it. I'm working now with a woman who is almost unknown. She's 89 years old. She's has an extraordinary life in 4 different countries. She has stayed in the background and worked with like Julia Child and other people who you would recognize. She was in like a backup singer that nobody really noticed. I met her and I started talking to her. I went, oh my God, what an amazing story. I want to know your story. It was a book event that I went to promote my book in Philadelphia, and it was hosted by La Dame d'Escoffier. And she's one of the dames. And so I was just fascinated by her story. And she said, it's been my dream to do a cookbook. And I said, well, let's talk. I just realized that in her voice, it's just fascinating to be, I guess it's like an actor. It's like a similar thing. Ghostwriting in someone else's voice is like taking on a different character. And just like an actor has to take on a different character and learn how that character would act and think and talk and I guess that's the process of that one. And then I just love, it's a challenge. I love difficult men too, but I love
That's another podcast.
That's another one, yeah. No, but like her recipes are all, a glass of this, a little bit of that. And so that process fascinates me. And we're doing a lot of it via FaceTime. So I'm watching her cook something and I'm going, okay, well, let's see. If she's doing a 3-finger pinch, then I'm going to measure that out, And so that's a 4 of it. Let me see that glass again, And so to me, that's fun. To me, it's fun and challenging. I did one recently where it was a food influencer who couldn't cook.
That blows my mind on so many levels, but how did that work?
Oh, yeah. Well, I finally said, listen, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through all your TikToks You just give me a list of recipes that you want to do. And I'm going to go through all your TikToks and I'm going to figure out what your little shtick is. Because everybody's got like their little shtick that they do, you know, their little like quirky thing that they, and especially on TikTok when you have like a second, they've got their thing. Either it's a background or it's a specific way they approach things or a camera angle or what they're using to, I don't know. Everybody's got a little thing, a formula. So then I end up watching all of her TikToks and figuring out what her little formula is, then taking her ridiculous list of recipes that aren't recipes. I just pretended I was her and started from scratch and just made up something that I thought her character. I thought of her as a character is what I did.
Method cooking. Right. I love it.
Method cooking was like writing a book and developing a character through the recipes. That's exactly what the process was.
And making recipes that work because you have the experience to do so.
Yeah. So I love that.
These days, how much of your career is writing versus styling or other creative work?
I am really loving the process of writing. I'm really loving it. I mean, everything from writing recipes to head notes to actual books to Substacks to everything, probably because all that information is in here dying to get out. But I would have to say a good maybe 30% is writing, cookbook writing and ghostwriting and all that. And then I'm directing, so that's a small percentage, but not that small. It's growing. That's fun. I have about, I'll have like about 6 spots that I do a year, maybe. I mean, most of them are broadcast, and then there are a couple of smaller. This latest one is going to be for dark social. Have you heard that term?
It sounds familiar, but I don't think I know what it is. Yeah.
It's meant to feel like word of mouth rather than something that was generated by a brand.
Yeah, it is generated by a brand.
Yeah, it is. And that's why you need a crazy brain like mine.
And when you say broadcast, that's what we would have called television back in the day. That sort of thing.
Yeah. Like the big budget stuff. But it's moving from that. I mean, the budgets are shifting. They're definitely shifting.
Budgets are always shifting, aren't they? Where the money is, Yeah,
you have to follow the money.
We got to get to your book because...
Oh, yeah, the book.
Sicily, My Sweet, which came out in 2024. In the introduction, you wrote a book about Sicily years ago. How does this book fit with that one?
Well, that was funny. Do you remember Judith Regan?
Yes.
What memories. She was a groundbreaking maverick of a publisher, and she did some crazy things. She did Marilyn Manson's, but she did just a bunch of crazy, fabulous projects. And so she had, and I was still living in LA, she had bought this book on raw cooking. It was a guy named Giuliano. I was tasked to do the food styling on this. The guy was out of his mind and a genius at the same time. When I was done with that, I was leaving to move to New York like the next week. So the editor that I had been working with on that and the photographer, they said, well, as long as you're going, we're going to have you hand carry this film. And then when you get there, you're going to deliver it to Judith. I went, okay. I had no idea who she was. And I went, okay, I'll hand deliver it to whoever Judith is. I walked in there, I delivered it, and she started talking to me. She looked at me, she goes, you're Sicilian, right? And I hadn't actually done my whole DNA at that point. And I thought, okay, I can tell that if I say no, it's going to be a whole discussion. So I'll just say yes. So like, yeah, I am Sicilian. She goes, I've always wanted to do a Sicilian book. I'm like, okay, fine. It happened that I was going to Sicily with some friends. I get there and I went, oh my God, the pastries here are amazing.
Wow.
And I started just making notes and all this stuff, whatever. Then they asked me to come in and look at the film, and but I became friendly with the editor.
The film from the Raw Food book.
From the Raw cookbook, yeah. And she goes, oh, come in, we'll have lunch, and, I want you to see the film. Judith was there. And I just come back from Sicily. And she goes, okay, a Sicilian cookbook, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I just came back, and the pastries are amazing, like the colors and the stuff and the stories and the nuns and the thing and the here and there and all. She goes, okay, I leave. And I'm talking to a friend who lived in New York. She goes, are you kidding me? Judith Regan wants you to be... And I'm like, I don't know. What book? How do I know how to write a book? I don't even know how to write a proposal. I'm not even into that. So this friend, the editor, would call me and she'd be like, okay, listen, I'm going to lose my job now if you don't come up with something. Just dictate it to me and I will make a proposal because I'm going to lose my job if I don't get, if this doesn't material. And that's how the book came about.
That is an incredible origin story. I mean, a lot of times on our podcast, we're talking about, oh, this is what you need to do. This is unusual. Like the publisher is strong-arming you to do this book or else your friend loses her job.
Yes. And then she and her entire family, her mother, her sister, her daughter, her nephew, her brother, they all came to Sicily with me, which was a whole other story. But anyway, I had no vision. I was a beginning food stylist, just moved to New York. So I was like, listen, I'll do the recipes. I'll write it because I just was writing what I was thinking and feeling, and I just wrote it, not thinking I was a writer. I actually wrote it thinking somebody else would rewrite it.
Wow.
I got to choose the photographers, but I didn't get to do anything else with the book. Nothing else. I didn't get to art direct. I get to nothing creative, nothing, not the title, not the anything. So when it was done, I went, oh, that's not how I pictured it. And so for the last 20 years, it's been gnawing at me, wow. That's not how I pictured it. And now I know exactly what I want this book to be. I know exactly what it wants to be. I know exactly how I would do it now. I know exactly everything about this thing. I was at an IACP convention, conference, whatever, and this woman walked up to me and she said, I'm a literary agent and I know your work and could I represent you? And I went, in what? She goes, oh, I'm sure you have stories. I'm sure you have a book. And I went, oh, well, actually, I do.
Because the first one came out in 2001.
That book, the publication date was September 10th, 2001. Now you think about that for 1 second.
Goodness.
I had a book come out then too. One Potato, Two Potato with Roy Finnemore.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so did they ask you every place you went on your tour, where were you when the towers fell?
And Roy lived in Lower Manhattan, so yeah. Plus, it was the height of the Atkins craze, so nobody was eating potatoes either. So.
Nobody was eating potatoes.
So I think I went up on that one.
The other thing is that I did Clarkson Potter approached me and they said a couple of years ago, well, right before the pandemic, and they said, we have this idea for a college cookbook. How would you like to write this book? And it can be your book. And the funny thing was I had just been writing, it was right before the holidays, and I had been writing down family recipes to make a cookbook for my nieces. And I went, well, I've got some of those already done. I do this whole thing. It comes out.
Oh,
it
no.
launches just before the pandemic.
Oh, and it's about going to college and no one's going to college.
One's in college. They're all at home. I went, oh, wow, this is 2 for 2.
Okay, but now we have Sicily May Sweets.
And now people are going to Sicily. People saw White Lotus. It's a whole different thing now.
Yes. So, yeah. Okay, so here we are. Anyway, so I always wanted to do it. I knew this was the time very much when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Martha Hopkins, who's my agent, she appeared. She sold it. It was between 2 publishers, and Hardy Grant said, listen, we're brand new in the U.S. I loved their books in the U.K. and in Australia. We're brand new, and, we'll let you do whatever you want to do because that's part of your platform. And I went, okay.
Wow.
Well, it's a stunning book. And from the minute we saw it, we wanted to talk to you.
Your introduction is a really interesting cookbook introduction because you go on all these tangents, but they all sort of merge together. But you also talk about the internet and the role of the internet and how that's changed things. And I don't think a lot of cookbook authors even mention that in books, but you're saying that, Sicily's had all these great sweets. People weren't paying attention to it.
Yeah.
And then the internet showed up. You're providing a platform for just the celebration and honoring these rich traditions. That's the spirit that you went into creating this book. Is that also what you were pitching to the publisher?
Yes, but I didn't realize until I started writing it how much the internet and the digital age. I wrote most of it, and then we spent a month there photographing it.
A month?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was fun. While I was there, I realized how much it had changed and how, the pastry chefs, the first time I was there, they were all old. They were all very elderly. They were all like, nobody's going to take this over. For that book, my mission was to preserve these recipes for the first book. And then once I got there, that was kind of the mission for this one too, I have to say. But then when I got there and I realized that, well, wait a minute, these are all young pastry cooks now. some of them are innovating, and a lot of them are just really excited about doing the traditional things. And they're excited about having a wider audience with the internet. It's really invigorating them. Sicily is not a place where things change quickly.
Let's talk about the chocolate. You have this really, really wonderful sidebar in the book, and it shows just how much history you put into the book. But you also talk about like Sicilian chocolate, which is something that I feel like I should know about and I don't. But the reason that it doesn't change is like Sicilians don't like to change. So while, say, the Swiss were,
Yes.
they were making their chocolate silky, and the Sicilians were still doing it sort of in the way they were doing it when chocolate first came to Europe.
500 years ago. Yeah. And it's a blessing and it's a curse, because now when you go into a place that sells a lot of different chocolates, it's like information overload, information anxiety. You just look and how do you know? There's just so much chocolate. How do you really know? It all blends into, unless they have good branding and whatever. But I always say, one of the things that I say, and I've said it a lot lately, is it's less crowded in your own lane. And having stayed in their own lane, now it's getting a lot of attention. That chocolate is getting a lot of attention because it's not like all the others. Also, Sicilians aren't chocolate people, really. It never has really been part of the culture. It's really been about sugar and the nuts and the floral essences and almonds and that kind of thing. Chocolate has never quite found a way in, other than a lot of cannoli shells are dipped in chocolate, but that's for the tourists.
And chocolate's not one of your favorite ingredients. You don't love chocolate.
Not at all. I'm not a chocolate. It's in my DNA. Not a chocolate person.
I'm curious about the research for this book, Victoria, because you have a lot of the traditional recipes that you would expect in a Sicilian sweet book, but you also have, your sweet tomato and lemon leaf preserves, or the fig and olive shortbreads. And it's interesting because in the head note for fig and olive, you say, I wonder what the Sicilians would say about this, or it's just like your unholy cannoli. You talk about, so that process of blending the traditional as well as the innovative recipes you discovered in Sicily. How'd you do the research for these recipe lists?
Ooh, well, it's many years going back and forth for sure. And then reading Sicilian cookbooks, not American cookbooks about Sicily, European cookbooks, or Italian, not even Italian cookbooks about Sicily, but Sicilian books. And even if you read Sicilian novels, or even if you read biographies, autobiographies, whatever, there's always food in it. There's always food in it. It's just part of the fabric of there's always food. I just did a lot of detective work. And I went to unusual sources too, because a lot of the pastries, a lot of the sweets had their genesis, pun intended, in convents. So I went into a lot of, Benedictine records and Dominican records and church records and, synagogue records for the tiny bit of Jewish history that's still there. Unexpected places.
And were you reading Sicilian dialect in some of these recipes?
No, it's never written in, not never. It is sometimes. But the more academic things are all translated into Florentine Italian. I have to think about that too, because I have a lot of books that were written there's one book that's written, it's a huge book. It was written by a professor of, what is her thing? Cultural anthropology or something in Sicily, in university in Catania. And she did her dissertation on pastries and sweets. So, I went into those records, university records, and, the Catholics keep really good records.
That's a hot tip, actually. Yeah. Well, and let me ask you about certain ingredients. Like, I think a lot of times people complain that cookbooks have really boring pantry sections. I don't think that's always the case when people put like a lot of effort into their pantry section. And your pantry section is filled with all these little like nuggets of information. Can we talk a little bit about ammonium carbonate and how you started baking with that?
Oh, I knew you were going to start. I knew you were going to ask that. Actually, a few weeks ago on my Substack, I did a thing on culinary poisons that Italians use to make delicious things. And ammonium carbonate was one. Although it's not a poison, it is on the Department of Health's list of hazardous substances. So I had just tasted things. There's a very specific morning cookie. It had a very specific texture. And I had asked this woman there, what's this texture? And she said, ammoniaca. And so I had to figure out what ammoniaca was. And, also pharmacies in Italy are a great place to look for ingredients. Pharmacies carry a lot of ingredients. And so anyway, that's where I found it. But I didn't know how to cook with it. I just knew I went into some old Italian recipe books. I just found a couple of recipes and I thought, I'll just try these and see how it reacts because there's a different chemical I'd never worked with. And so I did a very basic biscotto, and it's coming out of the oven. I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. I threw it away. I said, must have done something wrong. I did it at least 2 times, maybe 3, before I thought, there's this thing called Google. I'm the one who, when you open up something that needs to be put together, the first thing I throw away are the instructions. And then it's like fun for me to figure it out. But you could have done it in half the time if you'd read the instructions. So I finally went to Google, and it says that the smell and the taste burn off with the moisture. But so you have to wait. Patience is not one of my virtues. So you have to wait. You have to bake it fully. You have to bake things that will ultimately be dry. And then you have to wait until the smell dissipates from your oven.
And to be clear, you can buy it at drugstores. I'm pretty sure like King Arthur sells it. I mean, it's available.
Oh, yeah. That's where I get it.
I think Walmart sells it. There must be other uses for it than biscotti.
The one group of people that still use it are Scandinavians, where it's called hartshorn. So they're still using it in baking, which I guess is why King Arthur carries it. So, maybe your Walmart has a lot of Scandinavian people. And
it's interesting. Victoria, you mentioned not being the most patient person. And we're talking about this text and all the history and the research and primary research that's gone into it. But it's very approachable and there's a lot of humor. And I'm thinking like the pistachio butter, get comfortable. This may take a bit.
Yeah.
We're talking about sort of how like almost academic the approach to this book is, but the experience of reading it is not. And that's not an easy balance to strike. I love the how to order gelati.
Yes.
It's super helpful. I mean, I would consult it before I went and ordered gelati in Sicily, but it's also funny.
Well, because when you're there are some things that just seem absolutely absurd. It seems absurd. And people don't tell you. I'm a person that if you tell me to do something, I need to know why. I need to know why I need to do it this way, or I may not do it that way. So you have to tell me why. When you go to order gelato in Sicily in particular, it's this whole thing where first you have to go over here, look at that. Then you have to go here and pay for it. And then you have to go to another place.
Don't tell the place you're paying for what flavor you want because they don't care.
They don't care. Yeah. They don't care what flavor you want. You just tell them how many scoops. The thing is, I finally went, what is this whole charade about? And it boils down to that you're not supposed to touch food if you've touched paper money. That's one of the things. And also they just like to have things more complicated. It's like job security. If you make your job complicated and an essential part of this whole cog in the wheel, then you're safe. If you make it important, then it's safe. So there's a whole thing there that fascinates me. But yeah, so at one point I was like, okay, this is absurd. Why am I doing this? That's the academic part that comes in and goes like, okay, let me research and find out why this is. But then the irony is still always in there. Like, this is absurd that I'm doing this. So there's the humor. But then I also have to find out what is the reason behind this. Not just why do I find it funny? Because then I'm going to be the only person in the world that finds it funny. And I won't be able to transmit that to anybody who's reading it. So I have to then research it and find out why this is so absurd. And maybe there's a reason that makes sense.
Right.
And if not, then it just becomes something absurd that's entertaining.
Let's talk about the visuals in this book because this book just sort of pops. I mean, I love the cover. I love the spine. And you have collages in it in the beginning part of the book. Was this part of your proposal?
Yes.
And this is pretty much close to how it turned out in the end?
Yes, very close to how it turned out.
What is your language to use, how you would describe the visual sort of story of this book?
The word that just keeps coming up is body. What's my language? My language is visual. It's difficult for me to describe the visual in words. That's why I depend so much on the visuals to speak for me. First of all, I'm very taken with the idea of chromophobia that has infected Western society. The color is being drained out of Western society. And to me, it seems like It's this unspoken elitist thing. If everything around you, if your car and your home and your clothes and everything is white or beige or somehow neutral, then you are better than everybody else.
Right. It's tasteful. It's elegant, which is all code speak for.
It's code speak for, white.
Yeah.
And if something is colorful, it is somehow cheaper and less desirable and from somewhere else. Like, okay, I'm going to show you cheap and less desirable from someone else. I'm going to show you, I'm not going to cave. I'm not going to put those, beautiful little sunshiny pictures of the diffused light coming through the table in the middle of the orchard and show you this romanticized version. I'm going to show you what happens when you get there and you see what's around you. And that's what it is. There's beautiful pink bags of garbage hanging from doorknobs. You just have to find beauty where it is. And then there's this other crazy stuff that happens there that is, yes, it's in your face. It's beautiful. It's Baroque. It's Middle Eastern. It's a combination of all that stuff. To me, it's really beautiful. And so I didn't want to back down on any of that. I wanted to give it all the color, all the authenticity, and not be so romanticized about everything.
Well, you succeeded, I should say. It's a really stunning book.
Thank you.
And the month that you spent there are a lot of location shots, but are there also, were you baking and styling, or were you, because it's a combination of store-bought confections as well as?
There were a couple of things, like the casatine, the little green, that was from a pastry shop. But I think almost everything else. And oh God, I could just go on and talk about this because it was so crazy. We went to a convent and we shot a lot of things there, and I had called ahead of time and I had said, I want to order a Triumph of Gluttony, some Chancellor's buttocks, some Virgin's breasts, and a cassata, because we're going to go there and photograph them.
These are all names of sweets, by the way.
Yes, all names of sweets. And so they said, oh, okay. And this place is also a museum now. It's in Palermo. They've taken a monastery with a fully functional 18th century pastry kitchen, and they've opened it to the public. I went there, and the woman who runs this, she brought me all the things, but specifically this cassata cake. It was beautiful. It was very ornate. And I said, I'm going to buy these things. And so I reached out to oh, no. Giuseppe is going to do it for you. So this Giuseppe would not let me touch anything. He goes, oh, no, it's very delicate. Very delicate. The frosting, we could see the very delicate. Okay, fine. So then I wanted to photograph it in this foundling wheel where they used to put the orphans for the cloistered nuns, and they'd send the wheel around with the baby in it. And now they use it for pastries. So I wanted to photograph it in there. At that moment, Giuseppe had a phone call, and they left, and they go, just don't touch it. So I'm like, okay, you're not going to tell me why not to touch it. And I want to get this shot, and we've been here for a really long time. I'm just going to do it. And Louise, the photographer, I said, you ready to tase? Are you lit? Is this good? She goes, yeah. I lift the thing up to put it in the foundling wheel, and it's made out of styrofoam. And so the reason he didn't want me to touch it is because it wasn't real.
Oh, my God. That's like full circle back to your Bon Appetit foam cake story.
Yes.
Oh, my God, Victoria, we could talk to you forever.
Oh, my gosh.
But we got to talk about the cover, too, because you're a food stylist, and yet it's an illustrated cover.
Okay. If I have to see one, and I get these assignments, if I have to see one more cookbook with a smiling chef at her kitchen counter chopping vegetables on the cover of a cookbook, I will not. No, yep. It's just enough already. And actually, I couldn't decide which pastry I would put on it. So then I won't do anything. Then I won't put any picture on it. It'll be an illustration. Phaidon was also interested in the book, and I have always loved that they do not put food on the cover of their books. Like, how about we do this? Evie is the book designer, and she's in Sydney, and she's just freaking brilliant, and she got it right away. I posted on Instagram a carousel of all of the different iterations of the covers. They're not all that dissimilar from what we started. We ended up very close to where we started.
Oh.
So she just knew right away. She got it. She's brilliant.
It's this like green, is it a real pastry? Is it sort of like just this conceptual pastry?
Can I just tell you that I didn't ask for that. I never noticed it. And the first time I went to a book signing, somebody said the same thing you just said. And I went, Oh, that's what that is. I thought it was a pretty green stripe, but then I asked her and she said, oh yeah, that's supposed to mimic conceptually the recipes that are there and the green that surrounds the little cassata cakes. And I went, oh, I had no idea. It went right past me, right over my head. I'm like, I love that green stripe.
Well, and that's the thing too. The book, like three-dimensionally, is so interesting because the cover, the spine, the paper stock, everything, you can tell that there was like a complete sort of visual idea behind the book. It wasn't like, oh, one person did the cover, somebody else did the interior, somebody else.
Right, designed by committee.
Yeah.
Well, that's the director in me. That's where it all comes together. And I feel like I have those visions, and I do.
The OG food creative.
Thank you.
Amazing.
And I should say, if I may take this opportunity, one of the things that I have always loved is mentoring. And I've always mentored my assistants, and they've always gone on to have really wonderful careers of their own that I support. So now I'm, mentoring and coaching other stylists and other food creatives. And if you go to my website, there's a section on that. And that's something that's really, really, really dear to my heart.
That's wonderful. Really appreciate your time today and hearing your stories. Like I said, we could talk for a long time.
I know. I can't wait to stay tuned to what you write next week in your Substack. This was so fun.
Absolutely. Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you for listening to today's show. If you have a question, a comment, or a guest suggestion, contact us at everythingcookbooks.com. We rely on listener support, and here are ways to help. Subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Order books mentioned on the show through our affiliate page at bookchuck.org. Shop our t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other great merch, or just buy us a round of coffee. You can also reach out about advertising on the show or becoming a sponsor. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.